we have to be almost altruistic about reaching our goal and our vision. That the place that we want to get to, that has to take precedence over everything else. What's up, family? Welcome to another episode of the Futures Here podcast, where we talk about the leadership principles that you need to lead this next generation. Of course, I'm here with my illustrious co-host, Robert Boydis. I'm Tommy Nixon. We're so glad that you guys are tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about really the power of consensus. So when we talk about the type of leadership that we believe that you need to have to lead this next generation, I think consensus is actually one of the huge ones. This next generation does not want top-down leadership. Yeah. And we've seen that. We've seen the top-down kind of leadership, super toxic. It hasn't worked out really well. And so how do you actually lead with consensus while still being the leader, while still having responsibility, while still leading and making decisions? But how do you have that consensus? And here at UYWI, one of our kind of culture pieces in the org is the best idea wins. Right. And today we want to explain what this looks like and how do you actually do it in your organization, in your church, because we think this is actually a better way to lead that will help you lead the next generation that is already super suspicious. They don't believe in the institution, and they're very wary of an old style of leadership.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting, Tommy, is in my long career in the corporate world, right, I spent a lot of time under leaders who were very top-down leadership. And they were good leaders, don't get me wrong. They actually led in a I think in a really healthy way. So I was fortunate. I did have some leaders that were not so healthy, but it wasn't until the last corporate gig I was at, that my boss actually led with this kind of style. Yeah. And so it was new to me. I didn't really experience it before. And so I was just kind of waiting, like, okay, just give us direction and we'll move forward. And then she actually invited a lot of conversation on a lot of things. And so it really shaped the way I lead now. More so than the hierarchical approach.
Can you share a little bit about that? What did that do for you as a leader?
Well, I think, first of all, I was always only leading downward. That's what I was used to because I was only led downward, right? So from top down.
There was no invitation to
lead up. And so it was always just, here's what we have to do. Here's a direction. Just go get the job done. And I led strategically, but it was always top down. I never felt like I really could speak into the things that we were being asked to do, or not just shape the things that we were being asked to do, but even speak into new things that we would possibly need to do. So when I got to this particular organization, and my boss started in our staff meetings with her top leadership team, started inviting conversation about the things that we were doing and asking to speak into it. And then not just inviting us, but actually shaping it that way based on the feedback he was getting. That just was different for me. At first, it was very difficult for me to speak up. And I was like, well, I just need to kind of wait it out. But then I noticed that everybody else seemed to have any problem speaking up. So I started kind of gaining my voice, if you will. And that's where I really learned, how to lead up. Because when you get invited into that space, it's not like it's just a free-for-all where you just get to say whatever you want, right? Yeah. You actually have to be very strategic and very intentional about the things that you communicate. Because part of me was just the way I'm built. I didn't want to seem foolish, right? So I didn't want to just start throwing out a bunch of stupid ideas. Not that there are any stupid ideas, but
at actually some points, there are totally stupid ideas. But
I didn't want to be. I didn't want to seem like I didn't know what I was doing, right? So it took me a long time to figure out, okay, what's my voice in this, and what perspective do I bring to that? But it shapes the way I lead now.
No, that's good. And so when we talk about consensus, friends, what we're talking about is, just on a definition side, it's a collective agreement or decision reached by a group, right? And that's really kind of through discussion, through being invited in on the problem. How can we solve this? What do you think about that? And as you get a consideration of various viewpoints, that's what we mean by consensus, as opposed to top down, which what we mean is it's all on the leader. Right. I'm the leader. You're here to help me do what I'm called to do. So I need to just tell you what to do. And I'll tell you, as a leader who was really built to be that top down, I like in a lot of ways, I'm actually built to be like that, to just bark orders and I'm an 8 on the Enneagram. That could be a real comfortable place. But I learned early on to be consensus, because what matters to me most is that we reach the goal. And I started to find, oh my gosh, people are around me and they're actually better at a lot of things than I am. And if I'm not utilizing that gift, then what am I doing? I'm being a poor leader. And so that's what, when we talk about consensus, that's what we mean. And then I like when we were writing some of this, I like what you had put. What's the difference between consensus and compromise? Because it can feel, when I've brought this up to leaders, they're like, what? Like, but and I've honestly heard leaders say, but everybody around me has dumb ideas. And I'm like, oh, well, then what kind of leaders are you drawing to yourself?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Right.
But, so what do we mean by that?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is, as we were thinking about this idea of the best idea wins, I think I've always operated that way.
Yeah.
The difference between then and now is, before, my idea was always the best idea. So it always won.
Yeah,
Whereas now I'm a little bit more humble, maybe a little bit more wise, realizing that, maybe I don't have all the answers. And so it's easier for me to invite people to think, oh, maybe there's some better ideas out. Not maybe, I know there are better ideas out there. But I think the difference between consensus and compromise, and I've seen this a lot, where leaders think they're leading by consensus, but really they're just saying, hey, here's the idea. What do you think? And then people will start just, tearing it apart or adding things to it. And what you end up with is actually not the best idea. You end up with like a conglomeration of ideas packed together into this new idea.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily the best one. Does that make sense? Like, you're bolting a bunch of things on because you're compromising. You're like, well, okay, this person's being really, passionate about that. And so maybe we should include that. And this person really doesn't like this part of it. So, okay, let's take that out. And then what you end up with is this weird hybrid idea that, again, is not necessarily the best one. I think that's, in Congress, when they're putting forth a bill, which might start off as a great idea, right? Then everybody, all the lobbyists, right, have at it, and you end up with what they call pork bills, right?
Yep.
Which is, it's not even the original idea anymore.
Bunch of pieces of something.
It's a whole bunch of pieces of stuff that everybody has their best interest in mind only. And what am I going to get out of that idea? And so that's what you end up with. Yeah. That's what I think is more compromise than consensus.
So I feel like the tension here is between the leader that is just my way or the highway, right? And it's just, it doesn't matter what you're not a gift. I just do what I say, right?
Yeah.
You have that leader there, or the other leader who might be a people pleaser, who does consensus so other people like them, or they don't offend somebody, and those are two sides that are dangerous when you do consensus-driven leadership, because on the people-pleasing side, it's actually a form of manipulation. And that's not kind, and it's not good. And then you do get a pork bill where it's like just pieced together, and so you're not really moving towards your vision and that overall goal. You're just kind of appeasing everybody and making sure, hey, is everything okay? We all feel good about this.
Yeah.
So when we say consensus too, it does imply, there's a shared understanding, there's an acceptance among the group, but it doesn't mean that everybody agrees.
Right. That's true.
And that's okay.
And what's funny is another type of compromise I've seen with leaders is that you actually allow the worst idea to win because you feel bad for the person. So, or because their idea never wins. And so you're like, oh, you know what? Let's just go with that because, that person never gets to see their idea come to fruition. And everyone in there knows it's a bad idea. And especially in Christian circles, we're like, oh yeah. Compassion, grace, all of that stuff. It really is pity is what it ends up being. And it's not kind at all. And so I think there's a way that, maybe I don't want to get off track here with regard to consensus, but if there is an individual like that, I think that's an opportunity for some discipleship, for some mentoring, for some development, where one-on-one you can have some conversations and help them understand, what their gifting is and really how they can contribute better to that whole process.
Yeah. In fact, I think the next episode is going to be like, what do you do with someone's not performing? well.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that, friends. So stay tuned to that. So as we get into kind of consensus, what does it take for consensus kind of driven leadership and process to work? Like, what are some of those elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key one is that you want to, in the consensus conversation, always try to seek some common ground, right? But also keep the unity of the group. It's important to respect kind of like the diverse perspectives and to receive everybody's ideas as a gifts. But that doesn't mean, again, that you have to just bolt on everybody's suggestions. I think the really difficult part about consensus, because it does have to be led by somebody, right?
Great point.
It's not just a free-for-all where everybody gets to decide collectively what happens. I think ultimately there may be some decisions that you as a leader have to make about consensus to say, okay, I see the common ground. Here, I think we can go in this direction while still keeping the unity. And like we said, doesn't mean that everybody agrees with every part of it, but they at least feel like they were part of the process, of the decision-making process, of the ideation process. And so there's a few things we want to do. One is when you're doing consensus, focus on inclusion, cooperation, and equality. Everybody should have an equal voice, right? Again, doesn't mean the ideas are equally good. It just means that they have an equal voice. I think one of the things that's important for consensus is it has to be solution oriented.
Yeah.
Like you have to be thinking as a leader, okay, what's the solution here? What's the end? What's the best decision, right? At the end of it, what is the outcome that I really need to be focused on? Because it can get in a consensus conversation, it can be very easy to just go off on rabbit trails.
And this is where that leadership comes in.
Yeah, where you have to, even now as a leader, you have to become a really good, strong facilitator to bring the conversation back in and go, hey, wait, that's getting us off track. We're not moving toward a solution. Let's make sure we get to that solution. And then again, I think ultimately, we have this concept about best idea wins. So I think, Tommy, that's something that you talk about all the time. So why don't you kind of share what your idea of the best idea wins? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So really, we have to be almost altruistic about reaching our goal and our vision. That the place that we want to get to, that has to take precedence over everything else. It has to be above everything else. And so as you were talking, I thought I had this picture in my mind, and I hopefully this is helpful for you leaders. It's consensus isn't the king sits on the throne and the subjects come and offer, what if we do this, my lord, and the king sits back and goes, I'll consider that.
Yeah.
Don't think about that. Think more of, if you think about Arthur and the round table, it's that you're equal around this round table. And it's not your ego. It's not your idea that gets placed in the middle. It's the problem.
Yeah.
So the problem gets placed in the middle, and then we're all looking at it together to go, how do we solve this? Or what do you think about this? And just like in a round table, if a problem's sitting there, I can have a certain viewpoint of it, but the person across from me also has a different viewpoint of it.
That's a great visual, yeah.
And that's actually what you want to do in consensus because, and we'll talk about this, some of the benefits of it, but that draws everybody in and we all attack this thing together.
Yeah.
Without that, then I could just throw ideas that I know I'm not going to be responsible for. It doesn't really matter. Hey, I just spoke up at the right time so my boss doesn't feel like I'm an idiot or I'm not really contributing. And you've been in those meetings, friends. You've been in those meetings where you know that one person who's a suck up is just going to say, they're just going to rephrase the problem. Have you been in those meetings with people where
too many of those? Yeah.
Somebody goes, what do you think we should do about this? And they go, I've always asked the question, what do we think we should do about this? And and everybody's like, yeah. And that gets weird. Now you're jockeying for position rather than being equal and looking at that. So that's really what I think about that. And for us, for you leaders too, really practically, it doesn't always have to be your idea.
Yeah, that's really important.
Invite other people to bring the problem that we all sit around with and go, what about this idea to that? And a lot of times as a leader, it shouldn't just always be your idea. Yeah. Like that's how you're creating a really healthy culture. And then
I think that's worth restating, by the way.
Yeah.
I think if you're a leader and and you claim to be leading by consensus, or let's say you're not used to that and you're starting to, okay, you know what? I think this is a great idea, this consensus thing. I want to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be practicing it for the first time as a leader. Here's the biggest tip we can give you as a leader. When you go in to have that first consensus meeting and you invite all these people to the table to solve a problem or to make a decision, shut up. Don't talk so much.
Oh, so good.
Because if they're used to you leading hierarchically and just giving commands, and then you invite them to a consensus thing and you start sharing most of the ideas and doing most of the talking, guess what's going to happen? They're just going to shut down and go, oh, okay, this isn't really consensus.
This is ego.
This is ego
stroking,
right?
Yeah.
And they won't, or don't shut down ideas really quickly, because if you do that, they're gonna be like, oh, he doesn't or she doesn't really want to hear from
That's
me,
good.
right? So I think the most important thing is that, as you said, it doesn't always have to be your idea, and in fact, mostly it probably shouldn't be your idea, right?
Yeah.
I think Coach Wooden from UCLA said something when he was, obviously he was like a legend in terms of how he led his team, right? But he said, be interested in finding the best way, not in having it your own way. And that created a culture where everybody kind of knew their place, knew their role, knew their contribution, understood their value, and contributed to a winning team.
So how, like in some ways, how have we seen this work through our own org, or even in your experience? Like, what are some ways that just to give them an example of like, this is what it looks like, or the types of decisions? Because we're not just talking about small decisions.
We're not talking about small decisions. I mean, I think the biggest decision that probably a lot of our leaders in our network can relate to is our decision to stop doing conference.
Yeah.
I mean, conference was really, for the most part, our flagship product for many, many, many years. And it was amazing. We all loved being part of it, right? We loved the things that happened in there, the community that was built, the learning that we were able to impart to leaders about how to do urban youth ministry better. All of those things were wonderful. We got to meet people from all over the country. It was amazing. It was an amazing conference. And we would hear that all the time from people who came like, oh my goodness, I can't wait till next year. That was all we always heard, right? I can't wait till next year. Well, before pandemic, we got to this place where we were sharing about the cost of this thing. Like, hey, the cost of this thing, not just in terms of financial terms, but in terms of the cost to our staff and the energy that it took. It was taking us, 10 months and close to $300,000 a year to put on this conference. And I think, we got to a place where you were asking the question, hey, is this really the thing we should be spending most of our energy toward?
Yeah.
And so that began the conversation internally that you led us through about, hey guys, what do you think? Is it time to, take a pause on this thing?
Yeah. And know this too, friends, that it was a number of consensus conversations
it wasn't
up
just
to
one.
that point, because the way we got to decide that was I knew we needed to move away from events and more towards digital platforms and content. And so we brought in, so that was a whole consensus conversation. How do we do that? How do we do that well? Who do we hire? What needs to be on that team? We hired that whole team, and then I started looking at the budget. And because I was new, people weren't sure if they still wanted to invest in UYWI. So then the donations dropped. And we were just looking at real-time information, and we sat down and just go, look, we made this move. We think it was the right move. It also affects this. Should we have that? And it took us a couple months. And then by, I think it was December or January.
It was January.
January, we came to this decision and made the announcement, and people thought we were crazy. And I didn't hear this directly, but I know some people thought, this guy's tanking UIWI. Like, he's a terrible leader.
Yeah, some might still be thinking that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's okay. I took a consensus, and it seems like I'm doing okay.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing great. At this table, you're doing great, Tommy.
Yeah, a table of two. So when we did that, we knew it was the right decision, even though it wasn't going to be popular. But the team was all on board with that. Yeah. So there wasn't any dissension in our team. Everyone thought, this is a hard decision, but I agree with it. And that was actually really good. And even though they were nervous and not sure, and then the pandemic came 3 months later, and it was the best decision we could have made at that point. And so our hand would have been forced anyway, Yeah.
to make that decision, but it felt so much better that we came to that decision before somebody made it for us,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes that's what you're going to face as a leader, right? That you have to constantly be evaluating the things you're doing, the decisions you're making, the products you're putting out there, the service you're putting out there. I think it's important to constantly evaluate that. And again, the best way to do that is through consensus. Hey, what do you guys think? Do you think this thing has outlived its usefulness? Do you think it's time to put a pause on it? Should we regroup? Should we reimagine it? I mean, all of those questions are great questions to ask about your programs and your products and your service, but it's not something that you as a leader should just make a decision in a vacuum, because you're not only are you going to cause confusion for your team, you're going to cause confusion for your audience, for your clients, for your customers.
Absolutely. And after we made that decision, this just kind of goes to our next point we want to make sure you guys walk away with. Like, where does the responsibility lie?
Yeah.
Because as a leader, so I'm the CEO of Urban Youth Workers. I carry that responsibility. And so here's how we believe about this. If we win, the team wins. And if we lose, like if that was a bad decision, I own that.
Yeah.
And the reason we do it like that is because, one, the team helped us get there, but I ultimately still own the responsibility. Now, I have buy-in from the team because we opened up the consensus and they were invited in. We received the giftings of their perspective and their understanding, even if it's dissenting. But because it was a good idea, I go, hey, the team was amazing and we all won. What that does is it builds confidence in the team, just like when you were talking about at first you didn't want to speak up.
Yeah.
It builds confidence for your team and creates a safe space for them to speak up, even if what they're going to say is dissenting to the whole rest of the group. In fact, I love that, because that might be the one idea that we didn't get that perspective. Everybody else might be like status quo. No, we're good. And you just listen to that one person, you go, yeah, how'd you come to that conclusion? And so when you do that as a leader, it takes that and then you celebrate as a team. And that's part of the hard part of leadership. Sure, you want to be like, that was me, and look at God speaks to me, and but it was a consensus decision. There's no way I could have made that in a vacuum. And there was no way, let's be really honest, there was no way for me to communicate that well, for us to have a really clear communication on that, for partners to understand that.
Right.
Like, we played that out really well. And I know the way that I wanted to do it didn't have all the ways that you and some of the other team had said, we should probably do it like this, like communicate like that. Like, you probably need to call these people. We'll put the announcement out here. These people need to know first. You need to go talk to Larry directly.
Yeah.
So when we made that decision, it was communicated well, everybody understood it, and we all won from it.
That's such an important part of it too, is not just arriving at the decision through consensus and making it, but then communicating it in a way that invites other people to the process, right? Again, we did an episode on trust building, right? To me, this is a huge trust building process, right? When your team understands that they get to speak into it, and if it wins, we all celebrate together the win. But if it loses, like, the leader's not putting it off on, oh, but you know what, you said this was going to be okay. Like, you're just owning that, going, yeah, you know what, that was my decision.
I made that decision.
Yeah, I
with your input,
that.
But I made that decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think that the trust building in that process that we went through with the consensus and the communication on the decision, where it could have very easily been something that broke the trust of our leaders, of our network, of our audience, it actually, I think, improved the trust.
It did.
Because we communicated with them, with our constituents, right? It's so easy sometimes for, I think, leaders to be like, well, you know what? This was a hard decision. We had to make it. And then you just make the decision and your audience is left like, wait, what? Why? I don't understand.
Yeah.
If we hadn't taken the time to communicate that, I think our audience would have been like, what's going on over there? I don't understand.
So, and let me just put this into context. If you guys aren't super familiar with Urban Youth Workers, as the guy who came in after the founder, this was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And if we would have messed this up, one, it could have tanked the organization if we hadn't made that decision, honestly. Right. We would have spent all that money and then not been able to recoup any of it. It would have been really bad. But there's a part to it where because of that, we were able to create the kind of culture we wanted here. There's a lot of trust that got built in that. And then
Yeah.
the team and others also knew that there was a level of protection. You can go take risks. We can try new things. We can be innovative. And if it fails, it's okay.
Right.
Like I'm responsible for that. I'll go to the people that I'm responsible to, the board and to our resource partners, and I'll own that. But we did that together. But it protects your people from that sense of failure, and so that they can actually be innovative. And that's how the best idea actually wins.
Yeah.
So you have that protection as well.
So Tommy, because I know you've probably been doing this a lot longer than I have in terms of leading in this particular way. What's the process actually like for our leaders out there? Like they're thinking, okay, I hear this. This is great. I want to do it. Do you have like a step-by-step process? What's your thought process for it?
Absolutely. So here's how you guys do it. When you pull people in, because there's a lot of leadership that goes into it, and you can mess it up by the way that you lead
Sure.
it. So when you actually call people around this, metaphorical round table, you want to level set. You kind of establish common ground and understanding. You're really clear about what you're doing there. So, hey, here's the problem.
Yeah.
Or here's, and I need solutions to this. What do you think? And sometimes you have to level set to the sense of, hey, here's the problem. Don't worry about this. So if I come and I go, hey, we had a donor, a resource partner that pulled out, and it's detrimental to the org at that moment, I could pull people in and go, listen, we got to figure this out. And if they don't have to worry about their jobs, I'm going to level set and make sure they don't have to worry about their jobs.
Yeah.
Now, they have to worry about their jobs. Okay, that's a different conversation, and I'll probably be really honest with that. But I'm going to level set so there's expectations. They understand, I want to hear from you. Here's what we're looking at. Speak into it.
I think that that first step is so important, that common ground and understanding, because if you're about to have a discussion about something and try to make a decision, especially a large one, and there's not a common understanding of the facts, of the situation, right, of the impact, of the possible meaning of this decision, then the consensus is going to go awry.
Yeah.
It's not going to go in the right direction. So that's a great first step. Level set, establish a common ground. And then you said also identify the specific problem then that we're trying to solve,
be really
right?
clear about that, because if it's really wishy-washy or not understanding, you and I were in a meeting the other day, and you were like, I just, wait, why are we here? You had to ask because you weren't sure if the person who was leading the meeting, are you asking for solutions to this, or are you just asking what I think about your solution to it?
Yeah.
Two different things. Yeah.
Or you're just asking for a bunch of ideas so then you could go decide
so then you can go
what to do. So it wasn't, at the time that wasn't clear. But again, if you're used to leading in this kind of way, you don't just sit there through the whole meeting going, oh, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what's going on. And you just throw stuff out. And then you leave a meeting so confused about like, wait, what just happened, So I think it's important that, we speak up and go like, hey, what's the problem we're trying to solve here exactly in this meeting? Let's be really clear.
Absolutely. So after you identify the problem that you're solving, you want to set clear, like ideation and brainstorming guidelines. Yeah. So a lot of times if you're brainstorming an idea, and there's different types of meetings, then you want to say, hey, there is no bad idea. We want to hear what you have to say. But then you can't make fun of somebody or down an idea if you set that's what the expectations were. If you're trying to brainstorm that idea, great. If you're trying to ideate around a specific solution and people keep on going on rabbit trails, then that's the leadership. You got to pull it back in. Hey, remember, we're not here. I see you do this a lot of meetings. Hey, you guys keep on trying to solve another problem. We're talking about this. And sometimes when you're problem solving, that's different than ideation.
Yeah.
So a lot of times if you say, okay, the problem is we don't have enough budget to do the conference. How should we communicate that? Or what should the decision be about conference? And somebody goes, dude, you know what we could do? We could do like mini conferences around the whole country. And you're like, what? That's not weird. okay, you're ideating. I'm trying to problem solve. So you just want to make sure that you're really clear and set those ideation or brainstorming guidelines.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, we come with a problem that we think is clear. Oh, this is the problem we need to solve. But you might decide as you hear people talk about it, you might decide, oh, wait, maybe we're actually solving the wrong problem. So even as a leader, if you came in thinking, hey, I need consensus around how to solve this problem, one of your folks might go, hey, you know what? Maybe that's not the right problem to solve.
Yeah.
And that sometimes can be incredibly beneficial to the organization and to you as a leader to be like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's the right problem instead. And then you can shift the conversation to that. So that's really good.
I think the next set is you got to clarify levels of input and decision-making authority. And what I mean by this is, as the leader, it's actually not always on me to make the decisions. Well, we have meetings where we go, that director or that person that has, authority over their department, I don't make all those decisions because that's not how we lead. And so I go, hey, we're here. Again, I go back up and I'm making sure it's clear, or usually it would be that person making that clear. We're here to help them make that decision. They're the ones that make that decision so that they're not always looking at me like, can I make that decision? Should I make? I go, you choose. You choose. And so you're really clear about the authority there, about who is and levels, like who is actually making the decision. And then your input, a lot of times I find that people get nervous about their input because they're only thinking about how it affects them.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I want to let people off the hook. Like, look, the ideas that you come up with, they're not going to be on you to implement. I just need the best idea here.
Yeah.
Now, for others, and this happens a lot in churches when everybody got a great idea for someone else to do.
Sure.
You want to be really clear about, hey, we're thinking through this so that you can go make the decision and implement. And so that's an actually really important part. Second, or after that, then you want to make a decision.
Yeah.
Whoever has to make that decision, they have to go back, they have to take the information, and they have to make the decision.
Yeah.
And actually, that's an important part because I find a lot of leaders, especially on the people-pleasing side, especially in the church space, they don't want to make a decision because they're afraid of what it might do. Friends, leadership is courageous. You have to be brave in this. You have to make decisions. This is where you as a leader own that. That's a responsibility. And then lastly, you have to, and we talked a little bit about this, communicate the decision, and you have to follow up as needed. That's another way that I see this go really wrong, is that we don't follow up and then share, hey, here's what we talked about. All things, on the table. Here's what we talked about. Here's the decision that got made. Here's how we got to that decision. Here's what we're going to do. That actually keeps everybody on the same page, moving forward where you want to go.
Yeah, the worst thing is to be part of a consensus conversation where you gave all these ideas and then never hear about what came of it.
Okay, right. How many of you out there, right? How many times have you experienced that, especially in the church and in Christian? What did I waste that 2-hour meeting for if you weren't going to take any of my suggestions?
Or multiple meetings. Yeah. And then you realize
nothing happens.
Oh, yeah. Or they decided, we just decided it wasn't a good idea. And you're just like, oh.
And a lot of times that doesn't get communicated because they're afraid of hurt feelings or they're afraid of blowback but that's where everything starts to get into a really secretive space.
Yeah.
And that's where trust gets broken. Be clear about the decisions you made and why you made it. You were in the meeting. This is what was said. Here's our decision.
Yeah.
Make the decision, then own it.
Go back and listen to our trust episode.
Absolutely.
Because that's really important. So why does this work, Tommy? Why is consensus, because we're obviously advocating for leadership by consensus to be a better way.
Yeah.
Right? We're saying the old model of top down, just tell me what to do. Everybody just kind of marches, along. Why doesn't that work? Why is this better?
Well, so I think you and I came up with, there's 5 things. So I'll share a couple and then maybe you could share a couple. One, it leverages the collective creativity and wisdom of the team. Again, your team is a gift. You want to receive from that. It is dumb to me that leaders do not utilize the giftings of their people.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Christians who have the Holy Spirit and never engage the Holy Spirit. I don't understand it. It's the same deal. It's like you're missing the absolute gift and in the relationship with these people. And that's how you actually lead them. So that's one. Two, it uncovers hidden gems within the organization.
Yeah.
We talk a lot. We have someone on staff who's an absolute like beast mode leader. And I overlooked her twice in interviews. And it was, and then when I reached out and said, can you help us on this thing? I realized what oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So sometimes those people that have the upfront and they're really loud and they're charismatic. Okay, cool. You can only work with those type of people. But I found people that when you draw it out, make a safe space for them to speak in, you start to see the absolute gift that they are. And you'll find hidden gems in your organization if you do it like this.
And I think as a leader, what's really important is for us to be able to draw those people out.
Mm-hmm.
Again, one of the rules of consensus is equality, right? Is to give them an equal voice and not just be kind of aligned with all the loud people who are always constantly giving you ideas. And then you jump in and you guys are having this whole conversation and you got one or two people sitting there going, oh, I'm feeling left out, right? Your job as a leader, again, is to be quiet, pay attention, right? Read the room and draw those people out so that you can find those hidden gems. I think a couple more, and then you can share the last one. It was, we talked about this a lot, building trust among team members. I think when you lead with consensus, when you have these consensus ideas, these consensus decisions, I think your team begins to feel valued and appreciated and heard and like, oh, I actually matter, like to not just to my leader, but to the organization, right? And so I think that trust building, again, go back and listen to that podcast. I think it's really one of the most important ones we've done so far. That will build trust among team leaders. Also, it facilitates leadership development. We talked about this earlier, that sometimes through these meetings, you can discover something about someone that you're like, you know what, I need to spend some more time with that person because either they're not participating appropriately or maybe they're not understanding, their own value. And so I need to help them, draw them out, right? Instead of calling them out, drawing them out, right? So how do you do that? How do you do that well? And so that's opportunity, I think, for leadership development.
Yeah, the last one is it really shapes the organizational culture. And this is what we want you to do. We want you to shape the culture of your org to be really healthy and really help people become leaders. What we're talking about is leadership. That's what you're describing. I'm like leadership, and yet so many places do not lead that way. And this is why we're sharing this stuff. And so it's through that kind of shared responsibility and decision-making that starts to shape a really healthy culture where the wins, I'm not here to help the main person win. We're here to see the kingdom win. We're here to see that ultimate goal and vision reached. And that draws people in. And so instead of having just one leader, I'm the leader, you have a bunch of leaders, and that will help you have a much larger impact in the world. And that's what we really want. So we want you guys to see that kind of innovation also. We didn't even get into that, but the innovation that can happen from this is huge. It helps you be that visionary leader, which we talked about a couple episodes ago. And so when your people are free to kind of dream up kind of radical, crazy, new ideas, it really, that's the beauty of testing out this consensus leadership process. So good. Friends, we hope you guys had a great, experience with us today. I think when we start talking about this stuff, I get excited again. I'm let's go do it. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. So we hope this is helpful to you. Make sure that you're sharing this, subscribing, liking, and making sure that those leaders that you care for or work with are also getting this information so you can lead this next generation with everything that they need to become who God created them to be. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.